President Trump surveys flood damage in Texas and learns what FEMA, once on his budget chopping block, can do to help. 1 year after the attempt on Trump's life at one of his rallies, what's been learned? How has the threat of political violence changed? A tax break for private jet buyers? Our Takeout takeaway: what else is hidden in the big budget law? Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to the Takeout. He reached down from on high and took hold of me. He drew me out of deep waters. That's from the book of Samuel, chapter 22, verse 17. That chapter of the Old Testament speaks to metaphorical enemies that arrive as waves of death, torrents of destruction. But also it speaks of divine rescue, the lamp of the Lord illuminating darkness. All of this applies to Central Texas communities still, a week later, struggling to make sense of the scale of destruction and death wrought by near-biblical floods that killed at least 121 and has left 170 missing and feared dead. President Trump arrived there today to survey the wreckage and thank first responders and volunteers assisting those who have lost so much. The president won't be able to see all of it because the tableau of mayhem stretches for miles. Mangled trees, overswept RVs, crumpled cabins, strewn like muddy confetti along the banks of the Guadalupe River. The center of this destruction, Kerr County, has suffered most. 96 fatalities and 161 missing from that county alone. Kerr County is, happily and pridefully, a place of quaint and deeply religious Americana where, as the Texas Tribune observed, church congregations outnumber grocery stores, and young children commonly recite Bible verses from memory. A place where Samuel, chapter 22, might resonate powerfully now. We're being drawn out of deep waters of grief and disbelief is sorely needed. We begin tonight with Olivia Rinaldi, who's traveling with the president. Olivia, what did you, traveling with the president and the president, see today?
Major, first, that Bible verse really strikes home because it is remarkably devastating here on the ground. You can see debris in trees up to 20, 30 feet high. That's partially what President Trump saw here today. Just a short little ways down this road. He was at Louise Hayes Park. We toured Kerrville yesterday and saw similar damage, just trees that are entirely uprooted but wrapped with debris of houses, cars, playgrounds, beach towels, just unimaginable, artifacts from homes that have been destroyed. Behind me here, you see the memorial for the 121 who have died in these floods. And you can also see, I believe he's right there, Governor Greg Abbott of Texas just arrived to comfort people who have been here all day singing those church hymns, talking about their loved ones, petting some of the emotional support dogs who have been here on the ground. Today, it was humming a little bit more today in Kerrville as people were waiting for President Trump to arrive on the ground as the comforter-in-chief today, and that's what he did. He said he met with some of the parents who lost their children at those campgrounds just a short ways away from here. This is kind of the big metropolitan hub for the Guadalupe River. It's here and Hunt, Texas, where they have seen the most devastation.
And Olivia, to what degree has the president talked about the role the federal government will play in this disaster going forward?
He's been mum on what it looks like going forward, choosing to really look back. He's been giving a lot of praise to Secretary Noem. He's been praising FEMA. But the question in all of this is what actually happens to FEMA? We know the president has said he wants it to be dismantled, to look different, and they want these federal disasters to not be handled at a federal level, but to be handled by states. The question there being, though, these state budgets, even in the state state as big as Texas can't handle these disasters by themselves. Millions and millions of dollars are needed to rebuild this area. And just to give you a sense of how large the devastation was, Major, 27 miles away, driving to get here, you could see devastations in a different county. So it's not just localized to one area. These these disasters that rise to the federal level are often large and sweeping. So there is going to be a larger response needed, and sometimes they take not months, but years. The president today said he pledged to be with Texas through the end and to get them what they need, including what could potentially be more of a siren system to let people know in the future whether or not there are flash floods happening, whether or not they're in danger of being swept away in a flood. But the president saying he intends to keep working with Texas Governor Greg Abbott through all of this.
Specifics and dollar amounts yet to come from the president and the federal government. Olivia Rinaldi on the scene for us. Thank you so very much. Alejandro Serrano joins me now. He is a politics reporter for the Texas Tribune. I'm so glad you're with us. As I understand it, Alejandro, you also covered the mass shooting in Uvalde. So you have been witness to state responses to catastrophes. Is there any comparison, anything you find similar in either the responses or lack of responses thus far?
Thank you for having me. I think both situations are very different, but I think one of the big things right now is the number of questions that remain unanswered. Especially with Kerrville, my colleagues have been on the ground all week just trying to piece together the timeline of events. When did warnings go out? Which elected officials, which government officials knew what information at what point, and then what did they do with that information before sun rose July 4th and the scope of the devastation kind of came into picture.
And Alejandro, for my audience's benefit, what would you say is the ratio of questions to comprehensive answers from those who've been asked to provide that kind of basic timeline information?
Well, I think right now the questions far outnumber the answers. Local officials have said that their priority is finding people. We must remember that more than 100 people have already been confirmed dead, and more than 150 people remain missing. Today marks a week. That is a remarkable number of humans that we're talking about. So officials have said that's their priority. At the federal level, we have seen, a defense of the idea to scale back FEMA, repurpose it, also defense of cuts to the National Weather Service. Just minutes ago, President Trump was in Kerrville, and he again defended the response and said that it was quick and it was appropriate and it was great, but also that the devastation was unlike anything he's ever seen.
There's going to be a special session of the Texas legislature to address this. What's on the agenda? What might Texans expect to come from it?
Yes, there's going to be an investigation of sorts, similar to, you mentioned the mass shooting in Uvalde. That also, the legislature also did that, and the governor has directed lawmakers to look into a couple of different things. One being, whether emergency communication systems need to be in place, and also looking at the state's flood warning system. This is an area that is prone to floods, and that's kind of one of the key questions: is how did this happen in an area that almost expects floods?
Alejandro Serrano, the Texas Tribune, I appreciate your time very much. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Texas Republican Congressman Pete Sessions joins me now. He was with President Trump in Kerrville earlier today, and I want to warn our audience in advance, the connection with Congressman Sessions might be a little truncated. It might be a little hard. We're going to get through this as best we can. Congressman, I do appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us. Tell my audience what you personally have seen and your observations of President Trump's interactions.
Major, thank you very much. Today was a side of President Trump that I think people here in Texas not only respected, but really gathered together to hear the president, who I think properly put into place not only what happened here, but the work that needs to be done. The president was very somber. He was almost subdued. He had been with
Well,
but it seemed the devastation.
Okay.
So he saw the devastation and he met with the families, and it gave him a real sense of exactly what our challenges are here and what this community went through. And I just thought the president was spot on. There wasn't one person that was here that didn't believe he understood the gravity of this. And I think he responded on behalf of the nation very well.
Congressman, speaking of the gravity, it is enormous, almost incomprehensible for those of us who are not there. What role should the federal government play? Will you come back to Washington and tell your colleagues there needs to be supplemental assistance sent to Texas by the federal government right away?
Well, for sure, there will be what we do call a supplemental bill that is appropriations. But I think in the scheme of things, there's so many stories to be told. And that is, as has been mentioned, the development of FEMA. What is that relationship? How can we talk about what it ought to be without being accused of we're not going to do something that's the right thing? And the most important thing I think that we need to keep in mind is that the federal government right now is dealing with North Carolina. They're dealing with New Mexico. They're dealing with this right now in Texas. And this is a circumstance that, in my opinion, over time is going to be happening. I have been at 4 of these before. We went to Florida as a follow-up from the hurricane 2 years ago. We have been to North Carolina, where 1 year ago, the great big hurricane that came to ground, and we have been in Hawaii. So this is the 4th opportunity that we've had to see major damage that is done. So the question is, what is the role of FEMA? And I think that no matter what, the president's asking the correct decision that Congress needs to come up with, because I have seen as the chairman for government operations for oversight committee, where I was not happy with the role that the government took with the states and directly with the cities. And so it needs to be reviewed, and we need to come up with, I think, a more succinct answer.
Congressman, this is incidental to our conversation, but I have a lot of attachments to Texas, familial and otherwise. I know people affected by this. I imagine you know far more than I do. Talk to my audience about the human component of what's transpired there.
Well, I will first say to you, I know this area well. I've been here for some 55 years that I've gone back and forth. Secondly, I'm a grandfather. I can well imagine, not just as a grandfather, but as a parent, the feeling of what occurred here. And you could really draw attention to it, and we can love people and surround ourselves with them. This is a huge impact. We need to make sure that we have closure here in a way that gives people an idea of how important God is and that God loves them. And that if we continue to work together rather than trying to divide ourselves, it will make the transition much easier. Secondly, I think it is obvious to me that there are several important issues, and they need to be dealt with first by the state of Texas. And the state of Texas needs to, which they will, step up to the plate, and we will learn from that. This could happen again. It could happen very rapidly in a number of places in Texas. And I think that when we learned about the emergency preparedness that was taking place already, you kind of wonder, why did not that move forward rapidly, even when they knew a day out? And it has to do with working with some 40 camps here in Kirk County. And we're going to have to get a better system of talking. And that is the direct responsibility of the county management and the state management.
Republican Congressman Pete Sessions, Texas. I appreciate your time, Congressman, very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your sensitivity of this. We are looking for working together, not trying to divide each other. And I think this broadcast is a prime example of knowing that there are Americans who feel very sorry and sad for this, and we're trying to heal in Texas. Thank you for being a part of that healing.
All our best to you, Congressman. Thank you. Still to come, the Trump administration searching for election fraud that case after case has shown does not exist.
Our elections are as secure as they've ever been. We have 98% paper ballots in this country.
Election law expert David Becker with the facts. From security for the World Cup and Summer Olympics to private jet tax breaks and $1,000 set aside for newborns, we survey overlooked parts of the new big budget law. And as we mark 1 year after the Trump assassination attempt, who was the shooter? What do we know about his motive? How have the threats and Secret Service tactics changed? All that next on The Takeout.
There was blood pouring everywhere, and yet, in a certain way, I felt very safe because I had God on my side.
That was President Trump at the Republican National Convention last year, recounting, just days after it happened, the attempt on his life. Sunday marks 1 year since a 20-year-old gunman came within inches of killing then-candidate, of course, former President Trump at one of his campaign rallies in Butler, Pennsylvania. The gunfire, we should note, took the life of firefighter Corey Compratore and injured 2 others in attendance. Joining me now, former Deputy Director of the United States Secret Service, A.T. Smith, and our Justice Department reporter, Jake Rosen, who was at that rally, along with Olivia Rinaldi and Scott McFarland. And I know you were traumatized then, you were traumatized now, so we're going to tread lightly on this, but your thoughts a year later, Jake, about what went on there?
I mean, I think our colleagues at CBS have done a really good job of talking to people in the Secret Service about the security failures that day, which Olivia and our crew and Scott and I all saw that day. When we as reporters go to things in the position that we were in, we're bringing cameras, tripods, etc. There were no bomb-sniffing dogs that day, which is something that happens at the 100 or so plus rallies we went to. There's always a time where you bring your stuff through the magnetometers, you put your stuff by the bomb dogs. We noticed that wasn't there. We noticed there weren't enough police officers to hand out water that day in the crowd, and Secret Service officers usually kind of facilitating just general public safety, right? Those baseline things that in a field, it was about 90 degrees that day, no sun cover, people were hot, passing out in the crowd. We were handing out water. Our security that day was handing out water that was just kind of left there. It seemed like something was generally off.
Something was just missing, and you could see it throughout.
And I think just like anything in life, when you are at enough of something, you know that something feels off. Cell service was limited, things like that, which just felt weird to us.
AT, the Secret Service calls it an operational failure. Jake's observations, even beforehand, said something was off. Something was clearly off that day.
It was. And I think, the good news now is that the Secret Service has accepted full responsibility for that, for it being off, for things not being up to speed. I mean, there were very basic advanced procedures that weren't addressed. I mean, the communications issue, the crowd issues as far as processing and that sort of thing. The good news at the end of the day was that that counter sniper officer on top of that roof reacted in the way he did. And I would say if there is a hero, it's him, because if he had not done what he did, it would have been a lot worse.
6 suspensions of pay and benefits. The deputy director currently of the Secret Service told our Nicole Skanga, we had the soundbite on this show yesterday, the Secret Service can't fire its way out of the operational failure. You think that's a proper response?
Well, the Secret Service is under different rules, and a lot of people are not really aware of that. They're career employees. After 3 years and 120 days, they're converted. So they have some rights that obviously they can exercise that, for instance, FBI agents don't, because they're accepted service. So there's different criteria there. The Secret Service has a table of penalties for violations of policy and that sort of thing. I think it is surprising in some ways that no one was terminated. I think, the American people expected something like that, and for it to be
it could have
had.
been so much worse.
Could have been worse. And, the Secret Service had not had a failure like that in 40 years, 4 decades since President Reagan was shot. So it is interesting. They will have to tiptoe around that, I think, for a while longer. it is good that they've vetted out this discipline. I hope that it's in the way that it should be. I think they should have announced it earlier, and I've said that. It would have been nice, and the American people have been waiting for a year to hear this, and I understand that this discipline took place several weeks ago. So it would have been nice to get out front.
What would you say right now, AT, is the climate of political violence in our country? It's not just the president. We saw lawmakers in Minnesota shot, one killed, others severely wounded.
It's never been higher. And, you know, it's one of the predictions I made at the beginning of the last campaign cycle, you know, in my affiliation with CBS. I've never seen it this high. I've never seen it this sort of
not just
rancorous.
In Washington, but across the country.
Across the country. And, you know, it's any number of things that can happen, whether it's a direct threat, whether someone takes action, like you said, with, you know, actually picking up a firearm and doing something, or whether it's social media. You know, social media platforms have blown up over the last several years with online threats and that sort of thing. Secret Service does a good job in running all of those threats to ground and investigating them, as does other protective organizations, the Capitol Police, and you know, other cabinet secretaries who have functions similar to that. So it has to be done.
Jake, I want to bring you back in. What has CBS News recently learned about the gunman who was killed, as AT pointed out, Thomas Crooks?
Well, in new reporting that came out today, and in addition a couple of weeks ago from our investigative unit and Scott McFarland, they uncovered kind of a pattern of a boy who had tried to kind of excel at school, was potentially looking forward to advancing a career in engineering, and at the same time as professors that CBS News spoke to talked about the work that he was doing, friends talked about the conversations they had had with him about potentially stepping up and out into a bigger university and moving on in life. At the same time, it seems like something had gone wrong with him, where he had also been communicating about ordering bomb-making materials and had followed up when those materials had not been. As we know, there was a not working explosive device in a car or a vehicle right by where Crooks had been stationed. So I think, you know, he hadn't quite gotten there yet, but also just a general curiosity that we have not solved yet is just what exactly the motive was. We just don't know that. We know that he had searched President Biden's location, President Trump's location, and at one point had searched an AR-15 website, purchasing website directly after searching where President Trump was going to be, which was not far from, obviously, where Crooks was. In addition to where the RNC and DNC both were, because the RNC kicked off 24 hours after the attack.
Exactly. Bits and pieces of information we are trying to piece together gradually. A.T. Smith, Jake Rosen, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Senator Tom Tillis' surprise retirement, how that could benefit Democrats in the race for his North Carolina Senate seat. That and much more coming up on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Happy Friday, by the way. Here's a look at what else we and now you are watching this evening. Layoffs at the State Department, delayed for months by court fights, are now underway. Employees were seen with boxes in hand leaving the department earlier today. The department intends to eliminate 1,300 employees or positions in the United States. 18,700 State Department employees work in America. Democratic lawmakers have warned U.S. diplomacy, as a result of these layoffs, will suffer. The administration argues efficiency takes precedent. FBI Deputy Director Dan Bongino and Attorney General Pam Bondi are butting heads over the Department of Justice's handling of the Jeffrey Epstein files. The dispute erupted Wednesday after the administration released a report that said Epstein, convicted of sex crimes, did not have a celebrity client list and died by suicide while in custody. Before joining the FBI, Bongino and Director Kash Patel alleged a client list existed and that Epstein's death was suspicious, to put it mildly. Bongino did not come to work today, leading some to speculate he is considering quitting. CBS News has asked Bongino for comment. So far, we have not heard back. Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, increasingly at odds with the court's conservative majority, says her concern over the course of American democracy, quote, keeps her up at night, and she wants more Americans to take notice.
I would say that I am really very interested in getting people to focus and to invest and to pay attention to what is happening in our country and in our government.
Jackson issued several fiery dissents this term, emerging as an impassioned critic of the court's recent deference to assertions of executive power under President Trump. Joining me now here at the family table, Senate and Governor's editor for the Cook Political Report, Jessica Taylor, and Washington Deputy Bureau Chief for Bloomberg News, Laura Davison. Great to have you both here. Jessica, talk to me about the North Carolina Senate race. Tom Tillis announced he's not seeking re-election. What did that do to the Cook Political Report rating on that race?
We initially rated this race as lean Republican. Incumbents, especially in North Carolina, they haven't won a Senate race there since 2008. But we were also waiting with bated breath to see if former Governor Roy Cooper was going to run. That would have necessitated a ratings change as well. But when Tillis said he's not seeking re-election, came as a surprise on a Sunday there, right after they passed the big, beautiful bill. Really, because, Tillis, he voted against it. He's given Democrats clips that they are going to use in campaign ads this fall. Not
just in North Carolina, but nationwide.
Right. But he will feature heavily, I think, in that North Carolina race. Tillis is someone, he's won tough races before. He's the former State House Speaker, defeated Kay Hagan in 2014 and then survived in 2020 after his Democratic opponent had a sex scandal at the last minute as well. But he is someone that has been able to win those crossover voters in North Carolina. And the real question is, who are Republicans going to nominate now? Laura Trump is the name on everyone's lips, the president's daughter-in-law. She's from North Carolina. She graduated from North Carolina State. And it's sort of her first right of refusal if she wants it. Michael Whatley, he's the former chairman of the North Carolina Party. He's currently the chairman of the RNC. He's someone mentioned. Pat Harrigan, a newly elected congressman, there was even pressure for him to primary Tillis and different things. So, Tillis really represents sort of the double-edged sword there is, he knew if he voted for this bill, it was going to come back to bite him in the general election. But you have to have complete allegiance to Trump or he's going to primary you, even if that's
likely survive a primary.
Exactly.
Talk to us quickly about Iowa.
Iowa, Joni Ernst, she...
Republican incumbent?
Really, we're not completely sure. We reported a month ago that she might even retire. There's not complete certainty that she's going to run again.
Path out, yeah.
Right, exactly. She came under fire for, she questioned whether she was going to support Hegseth for his nomination because she's a survivor of sexual assault. She's been in the military. She's really talked about that and about women in combat and different things. So, of course, she got caught another moment that's going to live on in campaign ad infamy when she, was questioned at a town hall about Medicaid and then saying, well, everyone's going to die. And then she sort of recorded this sarcastic video the next day in a cemetery. And so it doesn't really sort of feel like her heart's fully in it. Several Democrats are running as well that have already jumped into the race, some state legislators and different things. But, I think Ernst, if she doesn't run, Congresswoman Ashley Hinson is probably going to get into that race. She flipped a seat a couple of cycles ago. She's a former news anchor. We moved this into likely Republican. If Democrats want to have any path back to the 4 seats that they need, it's a very tough map, but they have to put places like Iowa in play. Texas is another one that could come into play there with that primary there. If John Cornyn loses the nomination to Ken Paxton, right, which he's behind right now, this is causing panic. And John Thune was in the Oval Office this week trying to convince Trump to endorse Cornyn there. But this is, again, things like Texas, things like North Carolina, races that Republicans would not have had to have worried about if these incumbents were allowed to sort of run their own races.
I am advised that we always make room for this on our show, that when there is news to be made or news is being freshly reported, we're going to open that big door and one of my colleagues will walk in and tell us what that news is. Jake Rosen returning back to our set. Here at the chair. Jump on in, Jake, and tell us what we know.
For sure.
Because
Thank you for holding the chair.
Room on this program for news when it breaks, and it is breaking.
For sure. According to our colleague Scott MacFarlane, who we just mentioned, yes, a man was arrested last night in San Antonio for making threats in the same vein of what we just talked about with assassinating President Trump while he was just on his visit down in Texas. This man posted...
And a quick reminder of geography in Texas, Kerrville, Kirk County, just a little bit distant away from San Antonio.
Yeah, and this man had commented on a San Antonio news outlet's post about the visit once it had been public, a news article saying, "I won't miss," and then used a picture from Butler on July 13th of last year. As we know, the Justice Department has prosecuted and charged a number of people for making similar kinds of threats on social media, whether that actually meets the legal barrier of making a real threat or speculating. Sometimes it's right, somebody should do something about this with a post of that, or what if does anybody need a driver?
Right.
Things like that. This was more explicit than that. And then
this person has been arrested.
This person has been arrested and is facing a federal charge of making threats against the president as well.
Jake Rosen, that is real news. Very important. Thank you for walking in. Thank you for catching us up on it. Laura, I'm going to apologize in advance because this segment has sort of taken on a life of its own, but you have a lot of runway. Tell us about this week in tariffs for the president.
So this week was supposed to be the big tariff deadline, July 9th. All the tariffs were supposed to go into effect that he paused back in April. That didn't happen. He instead extended it to August 1, so just about 3 more weeks of runway. He started this week by issuing several letters. He's calling them deals, but it's not clear that these are bilateral agreements. These are really just sort of announcements of, I will impose tariffs of X% on goods coming from all of these different countries. The big one we're still waiting to hear about is the EU. Trump has really wanted to get some sort of negotiated deal here, but there's still sticking points on agricultural goods, on cars, and it's not clear that they're going to be able to get something by that August 1 deadline. This has really become a problem for companies, for countries, for even consumers of, do you go ahead and buy something now, or do you wait? Potentially the tariffs could be higher, or that deadline could get extended. So this has become a real upending of the economy. But meanwhile, investors, at least on financial markets, they have not yet really reacted, but they could if these tariffs go into effect in just a couple weeks.
And very quickly on Canada this week.
On Canada this week.
Yes, the tariffs.
Yes, so Trump last night said a 35% tariff rate. However, that one's not quite as scary as it seems because there's a big exemption for the USMCA, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. So those many goods coming from Canada will remain at levels they have been. Lots of details, and the saga on tariffs continues. Laura Davison, Jessica Taylor, and Jake Rosen, thank you very, very much. Where am I, Guy? Okay, here we go. We're going over to camera 2. Hello, camera 2. From the LA Olympics and the World Cup to Alaskan whalers, billions tucked away in President Trump's new budget law, which you might not know about. We're going to find out about it next here on The Takeout. Welcome back. For this edition of the Takeout Takeaway, and there'll be more editions of it in the future, I promise, we wanted to take a look at some of the lesser-known provisions that got tucked into President Trump's massive domestic policy law. It includes, in case you didn't know, and you probably didn't, more than $1.5 billion for the 2026 World Cup and the 2028 Los Angeles Olympics. There are also tax breaks for whalers and for owners of private jets. The government will even give $1,000 to the parents of newborns. Caitlin Huey-Burns joins me now from Capitol Hill. Money for the upcoming World Cup and Summer Olympics. Why?
Well, Major, both of those are going to take place in some part in the United States. The Olympics, of course, in Los Angeles, and parts of the World Cup in North America also taking place, of course, in the United States. So this is allocating about $1.5 billion for those two events, and it's mostly going to be used for security and planning. As you can imagine, these kinds of events bring in all types of people, lots and lots of people. Security is going to be at a premium and at a price tag.
So, tax breaks for private jets and whalers. What's that about?
Well, Major, as you know, a lot of times lawmaking is compared to sausage making. It's not pretty. There's a lot of stuff in there that we don't really know about and why it's in there, but makes it in there nonetheless. And these are two items. So let's start with private jets. If you're in the market for one, I've got some good news for you. You can write it off on your taxes. This is a provision that allows businesses to write off 100% of the cost of a capital equipment, a private jet, for example, in their tax write-offs in the first year. So $50 million jet, for example, you can write that entire thing off in the first year if you are using this for a business expense. So, Major, maybe you and I can start lobbying our bosses for that one.
We can do that for the rest of our lives, and we'll never get a call back.
And we'll never get it. That's important to note. And as for the whalers, our whaler friends in Alaska are getting some tax incentives in this too. You may be wondering, well, why Alaskan whalers? Well, remember that key vote responsible for helping get this bill past the finish line was Alaska's own Lisa Murkowski. She had put in a provision there that allows the Alaskan Whaling Commission to deduct more from their taxes for equipment than previously. So they're allowed to deduct about $50,000 before they were allowed to deduct about $10,000. That all is part of the sausage making in here, right? You got to give some little nuggets to some of these lawmakers to get them on board. That was one of them.
And another tax change, Trump accounts for newborns.
Yeah, this is really interesting. If you're planning to have a baby in the next 4 years, 3.5 years, I should say, this one you should pay attention to. So this is essentially a nest egg given by the U.S. government to families who had a child born at the beginning of this year through the rest of Trump's term, so through the year 2028. The government is essentially giving them $1,000 to put into a savings account, and you can contribute up to $5,000 per year to that account, and your employer could actually contribute up to $2,500 tax-free to that account as well. It's akin to some other savings accounts that people have grown accustomed to. Now, I'm no tax expert, so you should talk to your accountant and see if this is for you. But I should note, Major, this has been a bipartisan proposal. During the 2020 campaign, this is something Cory Booker talked about. Democrats have talked about it. Some Republicans have. So it's like a little nest egg for the government. I unfortunately don't qualify because my baby was born about 1.5 years ago. So just missed that deadline, but new parents should check it out.
A nest egg with the name Donald J. Trump somewhere on it. Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you very much.
That's the ticket.
A passing in the political world to note. Senior advisor to 4 U.S. presidents, Republican and Democrat, David Gergen, has died from dementia. This according to the New York Times. Gergen held senior roles in the Nixon, Ford, Reagan, and Clinton White Houses. In 1980, he advised then-candidate Ronald Reagan, to ask the famous question, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? That question helped frame the campaign against Jimmy Carter, and many credit that with helping propel him to the White House. Gergen, as you probably know, later became a very prominent TV pundit on public affairs programming. Gergen was 83 years old. We will be right back. A new survey from the Brennan Center for Justice finds 46% of election officials are concerned they could become targets of politically motivated investigations. Earlier, I spoke to CBS News election law expert David Becker and asked for his reaction to this and New York Times reporting of recent vintage that the Trump Justice Department was looking into using criminal charges against state and local election officials.
I think even more importantly, it appears that it's not so much whether the Justice Department thinks they're doing something wrong or aren't adequately protecting election security. It seems like from what the New York Times is reporting, this is about whether the White House wants to target election officials and then the Justice Department is scrambling trying to find some federal law that would justify a prosecution, which there isn't. And I think there are 3 big things to remember about this. First, as you and I both know from our book, The Big Truth, the 2020 election was the most scrutinized election in world history. And as we sit here 4.5 years after that election, there's still not a shred of evidence has been presented to indicate there was any problem with it, even as defendants in defamation claims were begged to show evidence, people like Carrie Lake and Rudy Giuliani and Mike Lindell and Fox News, still not a shred of evidence. Secondly, we've seen over the first 5 months of this administration completely decimate the cybersecurity infrastructure with regard to elections in this country. So while they might be complaining and looking for some kind of problems that the states might have with regard to election cybersecurity, they're actually ruining the ability of the federal government to assist them in that. And then lastly, our elections are as secure as they've ever been. We have 98% paper ballots in this country. Every place except for the state of Louisiana and a few counties in Texas, we audit those paper ballots. Election officials are doing a great job. And in those rare cases where election officials have actually contributed to a breach of cybersecurity, places like Coffee County, Georgia, or Mesa County, Colorado, that's been done at the behest of Trump and his allies. And he's actually complaining about what's happening there. So this ends up being very twisted. I think the DOJ is going to have a very hard time finding some kind of justification for bringing a criminal case. And if they do, they're going to run into a big problem because there are no laws that will justify it. And then even if they kind of create some justification for it, proving beyond a reasonable doubt that someone committed a crime is going to be very difficult.
David, also in this space, there is new reporting, I believe, from National Public Radio about an effort within the administration to create some sort of citizen database.
Yeah, this is a fascinating story, and it kind of goes back to what we were hearing about DOJ collecting Social Security information, and of course some of these false claims of widespread non-citizen voting. We know that that's not widespread. We know it's very, very rare. There were only 4 cases that were brought by the Justice Department in the last 6 months. But if they are, in fact, creating a database like this, it should be noted this was something that many lawmakers, particularly Republicans, opposed for a very long time. The idea that Washington could create a national registry of citizens and take power away from the states and create this mass censure of data on American citizens was something that a lot of privacy advocates and Republicans, states' rights advocates opposed. And now it's a Republican president doing it. And as Senator McConnell has pointed out, they have to be very careful about creating tools and precedents for a Republican president where he does something they might like, because Democratic presidents will do the same. And so you can imagine if there's a national citizen registry that has a list of everyone who's over the age of 18 and a citizen of the United States, while they might use that to find alleged non-citizens who are voting, a president of a different party or a president with different feelings on this matter might use it to just enfranchise everyone who's eligible to vote in the United States. It could be one of the tools to create basically de facto voter registration for every 18-year-old citizen in the United States by a different president.
Be careful the database you might build. One last thing. Senator Charles Grassley, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, has released a statement saying that it has obtained emails from the new FBI leadership about an allegation that came up in 2020 from a field office in Albany about potential Chinese efforts to create thousands upon thousands of phony driver's licenses as a means by which to create mail-in ballots to support Joe Biden. Walk my audience through what that might or might not mean.
Well, this seems to follow a tweet that the FBI Director Kash Patel put out a couple of weeks ago alluding to this. And what it looks like is that the then FBI Director, Christopher Wray, who was appointed by President Trump, had seen this allegation from this one source, and he and others in the FBI viewed this as non-credible. And if you dig into this allegation, you can understand why career FBI agents, even political appointees by President Trump, would say this is just not a very credible allegation. Even if the Chinese were allegedly creating millions of pieces of plastic, fake IDs, which would be a boon to all of the 17-year-olds who want to drink beer, of course, all over the United States. It doesn't create a record in the motor vehicles database or in the voter database. Those people can't get ballots. Every single voter who registers in the United States needs to provide a driver's license number or a social security number, which is checked against a database.
Mail in or in person.
Exactly.
Right.
Not against a piece of plastic. And so there wouldn't be a signature on file, for instance, to check that mail-in ballot against. So it would not have resulted in fraud. It would have been caught right away if someone had tried to use one of these things, these pieces of plastic to register. So this is apparently an effort to raise more questions about an election that has withstood more scrutiny than any election in world history, despite the fact there's absolutely nothing to these claims, even if they're true.
Breaking it down for us always. David Becker, thanks so much.
Thank you, Major.
That's it for the Takeout this week. Stick around. The Daily Report coming up next, right here on CBS News 24/7.